Yeah, again, thank you very much, Steve, for agreeing to meet with us and share some of your insight and expertise uh, in the field of internal auditing. We're in a master's course at Cal State San Bernardino, and the course is internal auditing. And throughout the course, we've learned basically the function of internal auditing as described by the standards put out by the IIA, as well as other governing bodies, and we've covered some risk management, the COSO framework, and things such as that. So we would just like to ask you a few questions here, just about your experience in internal auditing, just kind of what you're doing now currently, and just some insight to the profession and what we can expect if we someday choose to go that route.
Okay.
All right. First, I would like you about your educational background. How should an internal auditor be educated? What qualities are you looking for in your people?
Well, as far as my background, I graduated from San Bernardino with an accounting background, bachelor's of science. After that, I obtained my CPA license, and then as far as for internal audit, there is a difference between internal audit and public accounting auditing or external auditing. So because of that, I did take an IIA class, Institute of Internal Auditing class. It was a 2-day class that it was introduction to operational audits through advanced. So it was about a 2 to 3 day training course that really kind of gives you an understanding of what an operational audit is in relation to an external audit that's usually performed by your public accounting firms. So by all means, it helps to have those two sides. One from the financial aspect, because it really gives you the foundation of controls and how to some of the more standard techniques like sampling, understand like the whole methodology behind auditing as far as why is it you do certain procedures and what assertions are you trying to cover. So that's kind of one foundation. But then on the other side, operational audits or internal auditing, it's kind of more about you're on the other side of the table. Now you're there trying to help the business. You're not just there dictating that these are the controls or these are the assertions you have to adhere to be for financial statement reporting. It's more of like how can I help you as well. So definitely having a diverse that public accounting experience is definitely great as a foundation.
And this you said it was a 2-day course put on by the IIA. Is that
correct? A 2-day course. And it's the funny thing is with the IIA, a lot of their training courses are a little bit more expensive than the Cal Society of CPAs. As far as the cost per unit, there's a pretty significant difference. But yeah, it's by all means they give them. I believe now they're giving them on the webcast, but it's nice to actually go there in an environment where you have other business organizations actually send their staff there to actually perform the training. And it's great because you can collaborate, see like what is it that you're doing over here at this company as opposed to what I'm doing, and how do you guys handle certain issues with management, and it works out really well because then you're more of a team environment, learning environment.
Can these courses put on by the IIA lead to a certification, the CIA certification, if you chose to sit for that exam?
Yeah, they do have classes that they can provide to help you with getting certified as a CIA. As far as the certification, I do know that usually your CPA it's key. It's key to have a CPA license, if not at least your certified internal auditor license as well. At least one of those two is probably what's the minimum that's required in the industry. Anything extra, like the certified fraud examiner, those help as well, because it just kind of gives you more credentials. But again, it's not like it'll stop you in the long run. a lot of times is being exposed to auditing or internal audit, you get exposed to those kind of fraudulent experience. So from there, it's more something like, hey, I don't have my CFE, but I've been on these engagements where there was fraud and there was a fraud investigation that I was a part of. So, I mean, a certificate is great, but actual real life experience pretty much speaks for itself.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. I'll leave it to my colleague for the next question.
Okay. In what way does internal auditing add value to your company?
Well, when I was in charge of when I was part of the internal audit department before, the biggest area is because it was a smaller company. It had a lot smaller audit department, but at the same time, the resources between finance, sales, and marketing were also very scarce. Were smaller as well. So internal audit is great in which it can perform operational audits where, hey, like we have this problem where, let me give you a good example. One of my former employers, every time they bring a new market, they kind of agree to bring a new product out to the market. They have to determine what is the price we want to present this product out at the market. What's the price point? Because if you say you want to charge $3 for this product, because you want maybe like a 40% margin, gross profit margin off this product, but that price point is too high compared to your competitors or what you believe the public will pay for it. Pretty much that price point that you want to execute, it's not feasible. It's not going to work. So our marketing department was in charge of developing this price point, and a lot of the information that they would use from the sales team was never really challenged or questioned. So we would go out there, introduce a product to the market, and all of a sudden it's not selling. And because it's not selling, we have the grocery stores like the Bonds, the Walmarts, the Safeways coming back and telling us, hey, you know what? Your product is not selling. Either you need to discount the price, or we're going to kick you off the shelf. So now what you're doing, now you're throwing out additional funds to lower like special coupons or special sales, and you lower the price. And then when you get your financial statements at the end of the month, all of a sudden this new product that you thought you were going to be making a 40% margin on, you're only making 10%. So of course senior management would have a problem with it. So like, all right, what happened? We thought we were going to get 40%. We're only making 10%. We're not making that much money on this product. We went through all this headache. What went wrong? And that's a perfect example where internal audit can be a big benefit to a company where maybe they don't have the in-depth knowledge to understand processes, or maybe at the same time, sometimes people are just so overwhelmed in what their job is every day to day, they can't really step back and identify how can I improve my process so when I do present a new price point, it's more accurate. So this is a situation where I went in there, I interviewed everybody from the lower marketing people who kind of did a lot of the groundwork, to the sales department who give the information, to the finance department who helps kind of gather the two sides and come up with this dollar amount of this price point. And we found out that pretty much a lot of the information from the sales team that was being provided wasn't really being challenged or confirmed as far as, hey, yeah, this does make sense, or no, it doesn't make sense. They would kind of grab, they say, well, we're implementing this new product. This other product is kind of similar to it. Let's go ahead and just give that same, expectations of sales. You know, we're selling 5,000 cases a month, so I'm pretty sure I could sell 5,000 cases of this other new flavor. But I mean, so stuff like that wasn't challenged. So that's the thing where you kind of present a letter back to management saying, hey, you know, we need to instill better process or better controls. So, you know, these types of things are identified. There are challenged. So when we do present a price to the customer and ultimately the consumer, it makes sense. We know that the profit margin we expect to make is what we're going to make.
All right, that's interesting. How does internal auditing help the organization manage risk?
Well, from risk, I mean, it's internal auditing. I mean, it's the biggest thing with risk is that it's all around us. And with managing risk, it's a really cost benefit. External auditors don't have the luxury where they go in there and pretty much the auditing standards are what the auditing standards are. They have to comply to it. So really, there's very much negotiation on the audit fees as far as the amount of work that's going to be performed. There's a lot of governance around that. With internal auditing, it's different. You can review a certain process, identify all these risks, and then identify these controls to help mitigate the risks. But if the cost of those controls is so substantial, that's where internal audit can really provide it's the biggest benefit to identify, all right, how slim can these controls be? Or better yet, identify what is a key control that we can have just at this, here's this process, and we have all these detective controls where everybody's checking somebody's work, this person's checking that one's work, and this person's kind of supervising these other two people. Well, instead of having all these controls that are more detective controls, what about a preventive control? Something at the top level that'll prevent somebody from entering something by mistake and an error. If it's supposed to be an entry within a certain dollar amount threshold and you set some kind of controls over that, then that'll kind of help prevent. Then you really don't have to have so many people checking what the actual numbers are at the bottom. So again, detective controls are the biggest area where internal auditors can help implement that. And usually the cost of those is a lot more beneficial than detective controls. Preventive controls is cheaper than detective controls usually.
Okay.
Yeah, hi Steve. Since our project is about Mars, the company, do you have before I start my question, do you have just an example how the internal control at Mars specifically help in mitigating the risk? Do you have anything in mind right now?
Well, that would be a good example. We have an application called Open Pages that we use to kind of document all of our controls throughout the whole company, throughout all of our business units. But with that, the biggest part of that is identifying which controls are manual, which ones are automated, which ones are detective, which ones are preventive. So as far as specific example, I can't go into too much specific, but because I'm not part of the internal audit, I was more originally the internal control functional expert here for Food North America. But I guess you could say, a good example would be the controls we have over our trade. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with trade. Trade are the discounts that we give to our customers, again, the Bonds, Safeways, Walmart. And these discounts, it's usually managed by a third-party application software. And so one of the things that we identified is that we have a lot of people on the back end, again, verifying what's being entered. And we found that there was a lot of errors as far as were we giving the right amount of money to each individual, because based on budgets, certain customers should receive more money as opposed to Walmart. The amount of volume that goes through Walmart is significantly more than, say, a Stater Brothers, just because of the difference in Stater Brothers is more California, Walmart is pretty much international now. Yeah. So, of course, you would expect to give more money to Walmart. But we had a process before where we had 4 individuals who would kind of be reviewing what's being entered in the system and making sure things are balanced and things were right. But at the same time, they were spending a lot of time fixing errors that were created by the people who entered this information in the software. So it goes back to number one, identifying that our people entering the information have to be better trained on how to use the application, as well as we need to implement better controls at the top end, so we don't have to have these other 4 or 5 people double checking what was already entered.
Okay, clear. Good. Now, as far as my question is, what is your approach to performing an assurance engagement, and how closely do you follow the IIA mode? Your approach of performing an insurance engagement. I understand that maybe you were not involved with Mars, but I think it's usually usually standard approaches.
You know what? The IIA, from my experience with the IIA standards, they're not as they're very similar to the AICPA, but the one great thing about the AICPA is that they give a lot more guidance as opposed to the IIA. Usually, what I found is that I use the IIA is more based on theory from my opinion, and usually what I found out, I always defaulted back to my public accounting experience on what I learned as far as what were the accounting standards. They're either based on the IICPA, or if not, just your auditing standards, SEC. So for me, I used more my public accounting background for that, and at the same time, in internal audit, you really don't do that much assurance audits because that's already performed by the external auditor. So it's really, you don't want to be duplicating somebody else's work. That's why one thing, as far as part of being an internal audit department, or you have to work closely with your external auditors to identify from the external audit perspective, what do you plan to audit this year? And can internal audit perform some of these duties for you as a cost savings for the company? Or maybe there's just so much that needs to happen during the year. Maybe you guys communicate. Maybe internal audit and external auditors can be like, hey, how about you guys take care of this area for this year, and we'll audit this area. But for the most part, you're going to find a lot of your external auditors will kind of, even though they say they want to work with the internal auditors, they rather perform their own assurance work for their engagement. This way they control the amount of work that's being done. They control the integrity of that information. And at the same time, they can charge for those billings. It's more revenue for the firm.
Okay. And for the part that might be done by the internal auditor, do you guys focus in both like quantitative information and the qualitative information, or you prefer one of the approaches other than the other one, or more than the other one?
I'm sorry, repeat that again?
I'm saying, like, I understand, like, most of them are usually done, the assurances by the external auditor, but for whatever is done by the internal auditor, do you guys focus and give the same importance to both, like, quantitative information and the qualitative information, like you both of them in doing your internal audit?
I'm sorry, we were breaking up at the end. You're asking, like, does management view both of the audits with the same value?
Yeah, like you give the same importance to both of them when you're doing your internal audit?
No, usually, I mean, for internal audit, again, like internal audit, it's more based off of what management needs. External auditing, it's as an external auditor, you kind of feel like the black sheep.
Right.
You know, they just want you in and they want you out as soon as possible. You're costing them at least $150 to $250 an hour every time you're there. So they pretty much want to give you the bare minimum just to get you in and out, and that's about it. Internal audit is a lot more of a relationship where, hey, we're all employees, even though they are supposed to be independent of the company or independent from the department perspective. It's a lot more. It's kind of like, hey, help me figure out how to improve this process. I'm losing money. This process isn't working. You know, be my co-pilot in the function. So when these reports are given out, it's a different perspective. It's more, these reports are a lot more internal. They go more throughout senior management, as opposed to external auditors. Pretty much all you get is your opinion. You might get some management letter comments, which pretty much stay within the business unit, and usually they're small little things that sometimes you feel are kind of nitpicking. You know, it might be like, oh, your cycle counts. You're supposed to get cycle counts accuracy of 90% every month. Oh, you only got 89% this year, so I got to write up a management letter comment for you. And you're kind of like, really? 89%, 90%, and you're going to write a management letter? Yeah. That's something that external auditors would do because they have to stay within the box. Internal auditors would be kind of like, you know what? It's not significant enough for us to write it down on the report.
Right. So it's more important for you guys to give consultation service or give some advices to improve the operation efficiency itself at the company.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what internal auditing is. As far as assurance, my experience, it's very, very little. That's more left for the external auditors.
Got you. Which is the first goal, actually, or objective of the internal control or internal audit? Perfect. And Steve, the last question I have is, how does the IA keep an engagement following smoothly? Share tricks of the trade.
Okay. Let me see. Let me see what I wrote down. Okay. As far as internal auditing, one of the main key things is that you always have to have constant communication with your auditee. Your auditee would be the department or the group of people who you're auditing, as well as senior management. So anytime you step in there to a department and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to, marketing department, I'm going to audit you over this function. People always get scared when they hear the term audit. They always kind of conceive that you're kind of there to make them look bad, or you're there to find everything they're doing wrong so you look good that you did such a great job. It's like, good job, Steve. You found all these problems, but now you make the director look like he's not doing a good job at his duty, at his job. So it's always kind of that balance of communication as far as, right, making them feel comfortable that you're there to help them. And at the same time, letting them know that anything that I do find, I'll bring it up to you first. Because I want to make sure that what I'm finding, my findings, and what my original assessments on how to resolve these issues, you agree with. It's kind of like really tell them that, I'm your co-pilot. I'm here to help you. So these management recommendations, there's something that we have to come up together. And then at the same time, when you're having your closed out meeting, because usually at the end of an audit, when you present all your findings and also your management comments of how to resolve those issues, usually you're sitting there with either your audit director, some form of management from senior management, as well as like CFO, and as well as the director or the VP from the respective department that you audited. So you don't want anything to come as a surprise. You want to have that communication throughout the whole process, where everything that comes up, as far as here's the issue I found, here's my response of how to resolve the issue, and management agrees with me, or they don't agree with me, or if they do agree with me, they want to do something a little bit different. All that should be pretty much already agreed to even before you go into the audit closing meeting. So this way, in the views of the senior management, the CEO, the CFO, when they're hearing this report, they see you as a co-pilot with a director working on these issues, as opposed to you're there giving here are the issues I found, here's what I think they should do, and you have that director arguing against you, saying no, I disagree with the finding, or I don't think that's the proper solution. I think it's going to be too much of a headache. I think we should do this. That's something you definitely you want to avoid. So it comes back to having a good communication. And another thing, especially with working with small audit shops, you're going to find that internal auditing, a lot of the internal audit departments that you work with, usually, unless it's a really large public company, if they're private, usually they don't need an internal audit department. Good example, like where I was at before at Reese Foods and where I'm at here at Mars, we're both private companies, family owned, but we choose to have internal audit department. So because of something that's not needed, usually they try to be a little bit more scarce on the resources. So usually you have smaller audit departments. So with that, sometimes you can't get caught up in all the formalities. Public accounting, it was very much document every work paper, so it stands alone. You have your purpose, your procedures, your scope. Everything looks like a piece of artwork because it's so clean, it's so nicely documented. Because they train you in public accounting to say, hey, pretty much you got to have a clean audit work paper, and just expect that it's going to be a given that your work paper is going to be in a court of law, being judged by attorneys, and a judge for some lawsuit in the future. So you want to make sure everything is your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, everything is pretty much stands on itself. In a small internal audit department, you don't have the luxury of that formality. If you did, it would take you forever to do an internal audit. Usually you have a small window of time, so it's more about, so you have a little bit more freedom, but at the same time, don't let that amount of freedom or flexibility take away from the value of the audit. Concentrate more on giving back to the organization and not so much about having that perfect audit work paper that stands on its own.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. Very good information.
Hi, Steve. I'm up next with a couple of questions for you. I think you just you answered one of them in brief right now, but could you explain a little bit about the documentation process for an internal audit? You were just stating it was a little bit less formal than an external audit, but is there any type of computerized software that is used, or is it more of a manual process?
For the most part, a lot of what I've seen is a lot more manual. There are automated softwares that a lot of external auditors as well as internal audit use, but it's more kind of a like SharePoint in a way. I'm not sure you guys are familiar with SharePoint.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like a documentation tool where it helps you keep things organized. But for internal auditing, especially the internal audit department where I was at before, it was more about just using Excel and Word. It was very, very manual. I mean, as far as no computerized tools like where we were at before my public accounting firm, we used something called CCH engagement, which pretty much you could create a binder that has all the work papers as far as your programs and your work papers and supporting firm documents all within a binder. You go in there, you log in, you sign off on each work paper when it's complete, and then from there you can package it and email it to the partner or the manager who's could be another continent. They can import it into their laptop, review it, sign off, add comments, package it, email it back. So those are great tools that you have more in external auditing. Internal auditing, there are a lot of departments that do have certain tools, but maybe they don't need it to that extent.
Okay. My next question is, do you have any type of a whistleblower program at Mars? And if so, how is that utilized by employees?
We do. Both my previous employers at Mars as well as Reese Foods, we do have a whistleblower policy. It's pretty much communicated right off when you start. You're pretty much given the information, the link to it, and at the same time, it's also given to you when they review the code of conduct. Where I was at before, there's also an independence questionnaire that's given out to kind of help make sure embed that mentality in the associates that you do have to be not only have the proper code of conduct within the business, but also have to have a certain degree of independence between the business as well as its vendors and its customers and any other possible related parties. But the whistleblower program, usually it's ran by a third-party administrator, and usually that information is kind of sent. Usually it could either be done online, or they can call it 1-800 number. And at which point, that a independent third party kind of takes the report, follows up with the individual using a confidential ID number that's issued to them, so they don't never have to give out their name. And then from there, they kind of gather the evidence or the information, the testimony from the individual, and then usually it's kind of emailed to two people, one person within HR, and then somebody like the CFO or our high-level executive management. So usually you have some kind of two groups that kind of get that same information, and then between these two individuals, they collaborate to see, all right, well, what should be the next step that we need to do. So that's what was done before.
Thanks, Steve. Good information.
Can I ask you, would you feel comfortable using the whistleblower program if something had ever occurred?
Oh yeah, definitely. Number one, because it's confidential. You never have to give your name, and you know that at least two people will see it. Somebody in HR and somebody in finance. Because a lot of times people are like, well, what if I have a dispute against the way HR is doing something? I'm afraid that if I do submit it against HR, they'll find out who I am and they'll try to reprimand me. So the fact that you have two people, one from the finance perspective who understands the exposure from a liability perspective of a lawsuit, and it kind of keeps that balance, that check between those two departments and the rest of the company. All
right, Steve. For the last question here, I noticed in your email, in your signature on your email, it had SAP functional expert. Now, I think this could relate to this last question here, where it says, what impact does technological change have on your IA engagement? One of the things we've been studying in our studies is that IT and related technologies is moving auditing to more of a, like we talked earlier, as detective and preventive, but it's more moving towards just a continuous process where it's not before or after the fact, but all throughout and during. And because of this advanced capabilities and input and throughput and output of data, that you can continuously monitor and detect these as almost in real time. So they're saying it's a move towards continuous auditing. Have you experienced this with working with SAP and some of the controls that you work with and implement?
Oh yeah, for sure. We had this tool that continuously will monitor the access rights of all the individuals here at the company. And every time somebody is given additional access or access is removed, it'll rescan everything and identify, hey, if this person is in HR, this person is in accounts receivable, why do they have certain order processing rights as part of sales processing? So it's a continuous thing that pretty much it'll throw a red flag and it'll go back to, my position was the SAP controls functional expert. I just moved to a new position this month. So I'm kind of transitioning over, but yeah, so it would give me a red flag right away. And then I would kind of consult with our SAP person that's out in the UK to kind of, identify, here's the error risk that came up, so for the most part, a lot of it's preventive. If someone is requested or is trying to give somebody access, it'll throw the red flag and it will prevent them from gaining access, because it shows that this person either already has certain access rights, that if they're given these other access rights, it'll create segregation of duties conflicts, or maybe they have access rights because they show that they're part of AR, but the other rights are trying to given, it might be part of sales. So again, it kind of throws those red flags right away, and it prevents the person from gaining those access. And then that's why the red flag comes back to me, and then I have to go in there and identify it. And a lot of times it's a matter of, hey, you know what? You have somebody who's trying to get access to certain parts of SAP, but they don't know how to identify what those roles are. So they'll just pick the biggest one that, this one looks like it gives them everything. I'll just give them that one, because it's the easiest for that person, because they don't know.
Yeah.
So I have a schedule that's updated every 6 months by our SAP segregation of duties team, and of which it kind of gives a detailed list of all the roles that you can get in SAP and what are the risks associated with each role. So every time somebody tells me, hey, I need access to a certain part of SAP, I'll go in there, I'll be, all right, well, I'll see, all right, in order for you to have access to this area, I can give you one of probably 5 different roles. Now, which one of these 5 roles best fits you as the individual and you as in the department you're in? Because maybe this one might be like a senior manager who has access to review and edit. Or maybe this one's just a clerk who they could only enter information. So that's the difference between the roles, but they all have access to the same screen at SAP, but I got to identify who's the individual, what are they going to do with it. If they're just going to be a clerk entering information, then all they should be just enter only, not delete, not read, not change. So
now, where does the book stop on that? Who implements those policies and decides, okay, this person should have this type of access control and these segregation of duties?
Well, it's pretty much already kind of as far as the policies, it's a template that comes with SAP.
Okay.
SAP is like the Rolls Royce of
right.
of accounting software. So pretty much it's already embedded with it. They know that these composite roles are all part of AR. These here are all inventory management. So they know that you shouldn't have one person with the same access rights across two different processes.
Gotcha. So what kind of special training did you have for the SAP? Did your employer provide that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, the employer pretty much. I mean, they have like tutorials like crazy. One great thing about Mars, they have something called Mars University, which is a lot of online classes that they provide as far as how to use a lot of the tools we have. Inventory management approach, senior management approach, marketing, sales, factory. It's incredible. We pretty much have consolidated all of our learnings over the last couple decades, not only in chocolate, not only in food or pet care or Wrigley. We've taken all that into a best practice approach, and we have something called Mars University that every associate has access to. And it's great just to learn from real life examples that the company has gone through. And at the same time, we have something called Competency Week that's done every year, where they send us to different sites, and we kind of sit down with our fellow Mars associates and kind of, learn from each other and give classes on managing cash, AR turnover, inventory management. It's pretty much a great foundation that we have here.
That would probably explain the success that Mars has continuously.
Yeah, I mean, if you go